Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Ki-108, a Japanese heavy fighter coming at a tier 3 and a battle rating of 4.0. For the purposes of today's historical review, I'll be providing an end-to-end history regarding the Ki-108. With that, let's begin. The Ki-108's origins can be traced back to the Kawasaki Ki-96, a single-seat heavy fighter intended to replace the Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu. When the Ki-96 was discontinued after its maiden flight in September of 1943, in favour of revising the design into a two-seat heavy fighter known as the Kawasaki Ki-102, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force soon realised that they had an unfulfilled requirement for a single-seat high-altitude fighter that could intercept the American bombers operating at higher altitudes. To meet this requirement, Kawasaki's chief designer, Takeo Doi, proposed that the aircraft be based on the original Ki-96 design. The new aircraft would have a hermetically sealed or airtight cabin with a double glazed canopy and airtight entrance door. This being done to eliminate the need for compressed air to achieve cabin pressurization, the more conventional approach requiring the usage of engine power. To achieve higher altitudes, the plane would be powered by two Mitsubishi Ha-112 Mark II Ru 1500 horsepower radial engines. For armament, the plane would be equipped with one 37mm Ho-203 cannon as mounted in the nose and two 20mm Ho-5 cannon mounted in the ventral position. This armament was the same as both the original Ki-96 and the Ki-102 co-designs. In the spring of 1944, the Ki-108's development began with the 7th and 8th Ki-102 Otsu airframes being earmarked for usage in developing the Ki-108 prototypes. These airframes were modified with a new tail unit and a hermetically sealed cabin, leading to the first prototype being completed in July of 1944, the second in August of the same year. Both aircraft underwent flight trials, registering a top speed of 360 miles per hour or 579 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 10,000 meters or 32,810 feet. Based on the success of the test flight program, efforts were made to improve the plane's high altitude handling and performance with the Ki-108 Kai or improved model. For this purpose, the plane's fuselage was lengthened and the wingspan was increased. Two prototypes of the Kai variant were produced, the first in March of 1945 and the second in May of 1945. Both aircraft immediately entered testing, revealing that the plane's top speed had indeed been improved to 373 miles per hour or 600 kilometers an hour at again 10,000 meters altitude or 32,810 feet. Unfortunately, the war in the Pacific ended before the test program could be completed, meaning that the Ki-108 never realised its intended combat role or did not even enter service. Well, our historical review concluded then, let's take a look at how the Ki-108 handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the Airfield Domination map Kaminsk. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are our 20mm cannon, the reasoning being in my experience the stealth belts are the most powerful out of those available, consisting to 75% of high explosive fragmentation incendiary rounds, which combine well with the dedicated high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer belt of our 37mm cannon. As for our gun convergence, we're taking a 500 metre setting, noting that all of our armament is based down the centre line of the aircraft and therefore not convergence reliant. As for our fuel load, we're taking the standard 30-minute fuel load to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscaled on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis as always by talking about the aircraft's climb rate. In the case of the Ki-108, the climb rate of this aircraft compared to its heavy fighter opposition at its battle rating is rather strong, being able to match the best at its battle rating, these planes being the likes of the P-38J-15 Lightning and the British Mosquito. And this plane will surpass the likes of the Messerschmitt 410s, the Dornier 217s and the P-61 Black Widows that it's destined to face. The only time it's going to be difficult is when you're going up against higher battle rating heavy fighter opposition such as the F-82E Twin Mustang, which will outclimb you by a significant margin. And the picture starts to get bleaker when you compare the climb rate of this plane to the single engine fighter and interceptor opposition around the battle rating, where the climb rate is going to match the likes of the Yakovlev Yak-9U and the Spitfire F Mark 9, but fall well behind the likes of the Messerschmitt 109 F4 and the I-185 M82. To offset this, however, you do have an attacker spawn, which gives you an inherent altitude advantage when you first spawn in. And the return of this is, by the time you get to 5,000 meters altitude, so will your opposition in their single engine fighters and interceptors, meaning that in effect, if you've got allies who climb with you, you'll have friendly fighters in front of you to cut off the incoming presence of those dedicated to intercept you, and instead you can work on intercepting enemy bombers that have made their way through. and we've highlighted that with the Halifax Mark III, and we'll be carrying our momentum through here to a Heinkel 111 that's decided to climb off into the distance on the side of the map. And this is already bringing about comparison points to our review of the Ki-102 Otsu, which we did a couple months ago, link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now if you want to check out the review. In that plane operated best when it was given a clear sky to do so, i.e. having friendly fighters to escort it into its interceptor position. And here we're using the clear skies in order to bring down this Heinkel 111 in a similar fashion to the Halifax, and we can see how the heavy firepower of this plane makes it very easy to do so. We don't have to worry about getting too close and therefore starting to take damage. And that brings us on to one of the major weaknesses of the Ki-108, and our friendly Bearcat behind us is also going to highlight that. This plane cannot take damage in any form very well, and even that light smattering of 12.7mm Browning machine gun fire has done considerable damage to the airframe of this plane, also damaging an oil tank on engine number 1. This plane, when hit even by the smallest caliber machine guns, has a very high chance of falling apart in the sky. If the engines do not break, there's a very high chance the control surface will be damaged, or alternatively the wings will just come flying off, or the cockpit's going to be severely damaged and your pilot's going to get injured or knocked out completely. And if none of that occurs, you may just find the wing-mounted fuel tanks are going to burst into flames. And the problem with these fuel tanks is, because there's two to either side of the engine, what you'll find is that when one fuel tank is ignited, the fire is going to spread to the adjacent fuel tank on the other side of the engine, and that's going to cause the plane to completely burn out on one side. And I've only been able to survive one fire in this aircraft in all of my flyouts, despite the fact that this plane does have self-sealing fuel tanks. Nonetheless, as we dive down on this Firefly, we can see that whilst we have poor durability, our guns are going to make short work of our opponent's durability. And that's where this plane is going to excel. It wants to surprise the climb in opposition when given the chance to get to altitude in the first instance. You'll have to be subversive in your playstyle. If you're not given the ability to get to higher altitudes and reign over your foes, unlike what you're seeing here, then what you've got to think about is, when can I attack my foe when they're least likely to expect me coming? And that's because, again, if you go head to head, whilst you have a lot of firepower to go head to head with your foes, you have the difficulty in the fact that if you get hit even lightly, there's a very high chance you'll be set on fire. And P-47 Thunderbolt players will have the ability to point their noses towards you and not worry too much about getting hit, because they can open fire at a distance of say 1.5 kilometers, throw a load of incendiary rounds down range, and even if you manage to scratch them in return, they've got an extremely high chance of setting you on fire. And that's an explicit example. Which is why we break out the head-on with the Messerschmitt 109 F4 Trop here and decide to turn above them. Now here we're using the advantage of our very strong energy retention in the horizontal, and also the altitude advantage we had at the start of this turn fight, to demonstrate that you can turn fight with a Ki-108. And that its turn circle is comparable to the average turn circle of the Yakovlev Yak-9U on a relative scale of single-engined fighters. The turn circle of the Messerschmitt 109 F4 here is slightly tighter, but as we went up and forced this into a climbing spiral turn fight for a limited period of time, that's how we've been able to get the upper hand and follow the Messerschmitt 109 into a position to pick up a race in a day. And coming back to the energy conservation in the horizontal, that is the strongest aspect of this plane's energy conservation. It's surprising how well this plane retains its energy in the horizontal, giving it a direct advantage versus other heavy fighters and even the wider turning standard fighters such as the Focke 490A4 in a turn fight that doesn't end up going into the vertical. And the reason I say that is because on the other side of the coin, the vertical energy retention of this plane is rather abysmal. If you're looking to do boom and zoom on engine power alone, a maximum dive drop of 1,100 meters is going to be your limit, otherwise you will not be able to return to the same starting position and speed as you started your boom and zoom strike at. And in a straight line, what I've personally found is this plane really struggles to hold on to its speed, only starting to hold its speed in a level plane at 515 kilometers an hour, meaning the vast majority of your opposition is going to catch you in the long pursuit. And planes that are typically slow and lose a lot of speed when coming out of a dive, such as the Spitfire Mark 5B, will be able to follow you very easily and catch up to you much faster than you may anticipate. So that means really you never want to let anyone get on your 6. Alternatively, if somebody does get on your 6 or has the ability to do so, you need to recognise this very early on and take evasive action. Alternatively, when you're in a prime position to dominate over your opposition, you're going to need to suppress them as they continue to try to climb up towards you. Now you cannot afford to do this on a repeated basis, i.e. do energy loops over the enemy spawn, because you lack the vertical energy retention to be able to conduct a massive boom and zoom loop. So instead you need to take an individual pass, break away, get to a position of security, and then take the next pass. You cannot afford to rinse and repeat on a fast cycle, and we do so again against this enemy Firefly Mark V, taking them out of the game, and now we begin to swoop back up and away, not willing to compromise our position. Now one thing I haven't talked about is ammo capacity, and what you'll find is the combination of 400 20mm cannon rounds and 35 37mm cannon shells is absolutely lovely. And now whilst you've got a fast firing 37mm cannon, you've got ample ammunition to go around and you'll be able to bring down multiple foes before you need to go for a reload. But what with the fact we're providing ample time between our engagements, reloads are going to be frequent in this gameplay because I'm just timing my reloads to the engagement speed. What's also worth noting is that there's a 50 meters per second muzzle velocity difference between your 20mm cannon shells, the high explosive fragmentation incendiary shells coming out at 760 meters per second, and the high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer shells on your 37mm cannon coming out at 710 meters per second. And what this means is you don't really notice a difference in the relative muzzle velocities of your shells until you start engaging foes at a distance of 750 meters. Then it becomes noticeable, and by the time you're starting to strike foes at 1000 meters or a kilometer, that's where you have to start accounting for two different sets of lead, providing more lead for the 37mm cannon. Now here we're coming onto the concept of suppression. We know that a Mustang Mark 108 is trying to climb off towards what is the southeastern corner of the map, and we have to make a choice here. Do we bear down this foe who's trying to side climb and force them to stay below us for the rest of the game, which will consume the vast majority of our game, and this is where you'd have a fighter supporting you to eliminate this threat as you go back towards the centre of the map and take down bombers and other climbers, or do we alternatively just leave them to their own devices, let them gain the altitude and then come back to haunt us later on? And here we have to make the conscious decision of following this foe because we've got no alternative support. Now fortunately for us, as we go to higher and higher altitudes, what you'll find is this plane begins to pick up in terms of performance. The ideal altitude range being 3,000 to 6,000 meters, with the engines coming at their maximum between 4,000 and 6,000 meters in my experience. If you go above this point, what you'll find is at 6,500 meters altitude, you hit your maximum altitude limit for your engines, where they lose a degree of their acceleration and also their climb rate. And on top of that, when you get to 7,500 meters, you'll find that the control surfaces start to weaken, particularly with the elevator becoming heavy, and at 8,000 meters the rudder also picks up an additional heaviness. Now in terms of the ideal speed range for engagements, I would typically recommend 375 to 525 kilometers an hour, and in that range this plane is going to be at its maximum controllability. In that your roll rate to start off with, whilst it's below average as what you'd expect to a heavy fighter, it will enable you to change up directionally gradually. And as you gradually change your directionality in the fight, you can throw some foes off, particularly other heavy fighters. Albeit just note that between 550 and 700 km an hour, you will lose 50% of your roll rate. Then when you come onto your rudder, what you'll find is your rudder is rather strong and one of the strongest for a heavy fighter at your battle rating, giving you the ability to conduct a rather tight flat turn for a heavy fighter and also help out when conducting a hammerhead, as you're going to see in a little bit. And you also saw it earlier with the Messerschmitt 108 F4 in assisting us in making our turns over the top of them. Between 600 and 750 km an hour, you will lose 50% of your rudder's performance, which is a bit of a handicap when you're trying to be precise in your boom and zoom strikes, or the centerline mounted armament on this aircraft. Finally, in terms of your elevator, the elevator of this plane is rather snappy and the strongest control surface out of the three available in all given conditions. In that when you go to higher speeds, you'll find that there's no lockup on the elevator control surface. It's as responsive at higher speeds as you head towards your maximum dive speed of 893 km an hour as it is at lower speeds, i.e. 300 km an hour or less. The only thing is once you start to go to lower speeds, i.e. going below 300 km an hour, the performance of this plane in general starts to become rather heavy, the control surfaces are not as responsive we could say, and therefore this makes it a little bit more difficult to fly this aircraft, and it'll make this plane vulnerable to being caught in a low speed turn fight, particularly against the Zeros it's going to encounter, but also the vast majority of its single engine fighter opposition. Now in terms of using high-speed dives, one of the difficulties with this aircraft is the fact that it does not have the best dive speed, a maximum of 893 km an hour as already stated, but the difficulty is in getting to this speed, in that your dive speed acceleration as standard is below average compared to your competition, particularly the P-38 Lightnings. And on top of that, once you get to 700 km an hour, your dive speed acceleration tails off massively, to the point you're going to need to use up approximately 2,500 meters of altitude from this point to get to say 850 km an hour, and even more altitude to get to your maximum. Now here with the Mustang climb up towards us, we can see how our high altitude performance in our engines outdoes the Allison engine of the Mustang Mark 1 here, and it means we can hammer head over the top. They can't get a clean shot with their 20mm cannon. As they stall out and start to head back down towards terra firma, we're going to assist them in heading down towards Earth very quickly. As they make their way down now, and been taken out of the sky, we can look towards the Year 2 off in the distance, and we're going to charge towards them. Now it's worth noting the stall speed of this aircraft is 130 km an hour, and the stall recovery of this plane is rather admirable. you'll very quickly recover from a stall and only need to get the plane to a level point and at a speed of 185 km an hour, which is no issue whatsoever. I'd be very careful, however, about using this plane below 2,500 meters altitude, as it becomes a little bit heavier on the control surfaces naturally, and on top of that the engine performance wanes somewhat and you'll find it difficult to build up your speed at lower altitudes compared to at the higher altitude ideal altitude range that I've already recommended to you. Anything else to note as we charge towards the year 2 then? Well, nothing too much really, but otherwise you've seen that the playstyle has been focused very heavy around subversion and trying to keep our distance from major engagements, forcing our opponents into 1 versus 1s that we've been able to control in the majority, and where possible we focused on intercepting enemy bombers as we take out the year 2 for our final kill of the game, our 8th kill, and the game comes to its end very shortly. Time for the post-game stats. With our 8 kills, we're able to pick up 29,671 Silver Lions and 2,711 research points. To defeat the Ki-108 in a given matchup, I can recommend one or two approaches. The first is to lure this aircraft when you're flying a single engine fighter or interceptor into a turn fight, forcing this turn fight into the vertical as soon as possible. The logic here being that you're going to be using the poor vertical energy retention of the Ki-108 to your advantage. If you use a climbing spiral for instance, this plane will start to hang in your wake as it tries to follow you with an increasing angle of climbing spiral. Whilst it has the strong horizontal energy retention and strong engine power, the vertical energy retention is going to override this in the long term. Alternatively, if you force this plane to follow you for a series of loops, as it's a heavy fighter, one would naturally expect it to have a wider looping circle, and that is indeed the case, and the fact that it has the great initial response in its elevator is going to be offset by the fact the poor vertical energy retention will cause your initial loop to kick off a mechanism whereby the plane is going to lose energy in the vertical, and in the next loop the Ki-108 is going to have a wider loop, and this will rinse and repeat until the Ki-108 starts to hang in the sky for you to shoot down. And if the Ki-108 pilot at any point decides to try and break away via a dive or just flying in a straight line, you'll be able to follow them because they're not too fast, while they're below average dive speed acceleration and poor straight line energy retention as mentioned earlier. And we also have to consider that this plane has average acceleration at best in a straight line, going from its stall speed to 400 km an hour on engine power alone. That's a decent rate but nothing great. You can kick this threshold to 500 km an hour using more emergency power. And this means planes that are typically slow, such as the A6M3 Raisin, alternatively the Firefly Mark I, will be able to follow this aircraft in the long haul and bring it down. Option number 2, if you're flying a less manoeuvrable heavy fighter compared to the Ki-108, such as the Dornier 217N2 or the Messerschmitt 410, is to force this plane into a head-on with you at longer distances, because you'll have the greater amount of 20mm cannon firepower to bring to bear, and typically the greater durability in your airframe, meaning that the Ki-108 pilot has to make a choice. Do they dedicate themselves to the head-on and trade at best? Alternatively, do they try to snap her out of the way of the incoming fire? At that point you can try to follow them as they try to fly past your plane and shoot them down before they get past you. But by avoiding such circumstances in our own Ki-108 today, hopefully we've demonstrated that this plane continues the tradition in the Japanese heavy fighter line of a rather powerful aircraft when given the ideal conditions to operate, getting above its opposition and suppressing them as they try to climb to altitude and bringing down the enemy bombers that try to level bomb rapidly through superior firepower. The logic is not always going to be there in terms of you getting your way every single time, and sometimes you will have to be subversive and just pick on foes on the fringe, but you have the ability to quickly dispatch those foes who underestimate your firepower capabilities and your overall performance. As whilst you may be a heavy fighter, in my opinion you are flying a very beautiful aircraft and one that has the ability to bring down foes at such a rapid rate, this plane deserves the title of Lethal Beauty. And so I've been TX141, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.